patient asked me recently whether acupuncture and dry needling are the same thing. The short answer is yes. The American Physical Therapy Association defines dry needling as a skilled intervention that uses a thin filiform needle to penetrate the skin and stimulate underlying myofascial trigger points, muscular and connective tissues for the management of neuromusculoskeletal pain and movement impairments. The NCCAOM, the National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, defines acupuncture as the stimulation of specific points on the body by insertion of very fine, sterile, stainless steel needles to elicit a predictable physiological response. Sound similar? That's because they are. Dry needling is essentially unlicensed acupuncture practiced by an individual without sufficient training. Acupuncturists in the U.S. are required to complete a 3 to 4 year course of study at a nationally accredited institution, which then qualifies us to sit for the national board exams. We're also required to take a separate written and practical exam which evaluates clean and safe needle techniques specifically. Only then do we qualify to apply for state licensure, which is regulated by the State Department of Public Health and requires annual continuing education to maintain. Dry needling is a different story altogether, as this quote from a 2018 article in Healthline explains. Currently, dry needling practitioners don't need extensive training. No regulatory agency controls training, licensure, or supervision for this procedure. Because there's no credentialing board, there's also no way to determine if someone's training is legitimate and satisfactory. Yikes! No regulatory agency controlling training, licensure, or supervision? This sounds like the Wild West. No, not that Wild West. The Wilder West, back when acupuncture first started being practiced widely in the US, and anybody who wanted to could just hang out a shingle and start a stabbing. Hey, old Pappy Greenberg was around back then. Let's ask him what it was like. Come on. Okay, so we're here with old Pappy Greenberg. He's gonna tell us how it used to be.
So, we're gonna go back in the time machine to probably at least 40 years ago. My wife and I were living down in New York City. I started having knee problems. One of my buddies told me about an acupuncturist down in Greenwich Village. She was practicing in the kitchen of her mother's store. She had me lay down on a cot and she started putting needles in me. I was pretty tentative, to say the least. I walked out of there feeling much better. And after another 8 to 10 treatments, my knees were much better. This young lady was, I don't even know what her training was. One day I went down there for my visit and she had her uncle there who she told me was a Qigong master and an acupuncturist. He would stick the needles in his mouth before inserting them. Never swabbing with any alcohol, never anything like that. And I have no idea sterile process used for the needles. I was a pretty foolish, trusting kid, I guess. He would just take them straight out of his mouth and stick them in my legs or my foot or whatever he was working on. He claimed that his qi was very strong and that by immersing the needle, as it were, in his qi, he could then transfer that to me.
And since then, of course, as we all know, you have been bulletproof.
You bet.
Yeah.
He would be smoking a cigarette throughout the visit, and he would use the cigarette to light the moxa. And of course, I had never experienced moxa before, so I didn't have a clue what was, correct or incorrect. I was impressed with acupuncture. I started going to the 3-year acupuncture college. I graduated the school, and then I sat for the very first national boards that we ever had. There were no statutes governing acupuncture at that time.
Anyone was allowed to do it.
Exactly.
So there was no licensure.
Correct. We all started working diligently on getting acupuncture licensed in the state.
I mean, it's not like you couldn't practice.
No.
And it's not like you couldn't make a living doing acupuncture. So why did you all feel that it was important to be regulated by the state?
Because we wanted to hold our profession to the highest standards. We wanted to protect the public, protect our profession. That was how it began.
Do you feel like that raised the standard of care in the profession?
Yes, it did, because people would have to at least to know how to safely and effectively practice. We were all for people joining our profession, but we wanted them to get proper training and proper credentialing.
So to sum things up, dry needling is acupuncture, just without the extensive training, supervision, licensure, or regulations acupuncturists like my dad and his colleagues worked so hard to establish in order to keep our patients safe. If PTs and other healthcare providers want to learn acupuncture, we think that's great. We would welcome them at any of our Hogwarts campuses. We just want them to be properly trained and regulated so we don't wind up with the 21st century equivalent of the needles in the mouth guy.